Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Rolka. Thank you for checking out my video. This is questions from comments 50 of these. And there's actually kind of a lot more that were titled differently, but they were kind of effectively the same thing. At any rate, this is where I take questions of yours that I find in the comments on the YouTube channel, and then I answer them. So we have some really interesting questions today about ear training, some questions about fatigue, getting hoarse with your singing, a fun question about Paul McCartney that I'm very keen to address. And yeah, so we'll see where we go. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. I appreciate your support. You're a big part of what makes this happen. Thank you. So, questions from Comments 50. Number 1. I have a question about intervals. Once you know the intervals, you can go from pitch to pitch easily enough when you know which interval you wish to use. Presumably what they mean by that, too, is the interval in the melody that they're singing. It's not as if you look at a D to a G and then decide you're going to sing a perfect fourth. It sort of just is a perfect fourth. But in music, you see notes on a page and have to go from one note to another, which means when you see C3 followed by a G3, that's a fifth. But then G3 followed by D4, you need to know that also is a fifth. Easy enough to count, but in singing, there is not much time to count. Do you memorize the intervals between all notes? So when you see two notes together, you automatically know the interval you will need. The idea being that you see and then know the pitch you want, as opposed to hearing it played and then matching your sung notes to the played note. Is singing by sight done in real time or something that is worked out first, however long it takes, and then remembered for subsequent performances? So there's kind of a lot of questions rolled into this. But the main one here that I am discerning from these variety of questions is the nature of sight singing and an understanding of the scale and relationships of pitches. And you're close when you talk about, you say memorizing. Where was that exactly? Do you memorize the intervals between all notes? Kind of, sort of. I mean, I suppose it ends up being that way, but it's not as if I've sat down, or anyone that I know of, for that matter, has sat down and said, right, here is a G, there's an A, that's a major second, moving on, here's a G, there's a B flat. When you work with ear training, you learn the relationships between the pitches. And at least in my case, you learn to then associate it across the variety of keys. So you might work it out in the context of a major scale. Major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth. And then when you're in a different key, the relationships between the scale degrees are the same as they were in the other key. So from the tonic to the second scale degree is a major second. From the tonic to the third, tonic to the fourth, those relationships remain consistent. So what it does effectively is it takes this vast number of variables, if you had to literally go between every note on the piano, and reduces it down at least to this set that we can look at and work with our ear training. And that will translate through all the various keys. That is absolutely something that is worked out in advance. It is absolutely something that one practices. This is something that I still practice every day. I do not have absolute pitch. I've known people that do. It's pretty cool. I'm not one of those people, so I rely on relative pitch. I can take a key, do, re, mi, re, do, ti, la, so, and work out, the notes of the scale. And that's how I can work on melodies and also understand things that I hear. So I can work it in reverse too. It's one of the benefits of ear training. So that's what we practice. If you don't already read music, then that would be something to practice too. Because when you look at a piece of music, you can look at it and say to yourself, this is G major. So now I see we start on a G, goes to a B, goes to a D, that's the major triad. I know what that sounds like. I know how that works with my solfege practice. And then the sight singing is effectively, you've effectively worked it out in advance, even though you're looking at something for the first time. So really interesting question. Lots of depth to that question. Please feel free to leave a comment below if you want something elaborated upon. Number 2. I am a baritone just trying to practice his registration event. Whenever I find myself getting close to the secondo passagio, I hear my voice taking on a strange, airy affection. I believe that should be affectation. I probably should have looked that up. As I try to modify my vowel, this usually ends up in my voice fading out into a whisper as my vocal cords seemingly refuse to. So this is backwards here. Abduct is to separate from the center line of the body. What you want them to do is adduct. So A-D-D-U-C-T, past the secondo passagio. I was just curious of your thoughts on this. Thanks for the great practice video. Anyway, Jeff, and I hope to hear back from you at some point. Yeah, of course. You're very welcome. Thanks for a great question. It is a great question because you've basically identified the problem. And you've also identified what you need to work on, which is vocal fold adduction, A-D-D-U-C-T-I-O-N, through the zona di passaggio and over the secondo passagio. So, if we look at our trusty piano keyboard here, you mentioned being a baritone. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you're kind of a middling baritone. You're neither on the lower side, you're neither on the higher side. So that's going to put your primo passagio at the B flat below middle C, and your secondo passagio most likely at the E flat above middle C. If you're really far outside those boundaries, then you're either pushing your voice too hard or you're doing something else, or maybe you're not a baritone. I don't know. I haven't heard you, I'm afraid, so I can't say for certain. But here in this area is where you're going to start that process of incrementally changing your vowels so that you get a smooth transition over the secondo passagio. Your voice is getting airy, so the vocal folds are not remaining adducted. They are abducting. They are separating. This can be for a variety of reasons. One of the ways to practice this is on my channel. I did a 3-video series called How to Sing High Notes. I'll put a link in the description if I remember, and if I forget, please just leave a comment and I'll fix that. And it starts with establishing what it is you're looking for above the secondo passagio. It's not going to feel, it may not feel like you think it's going to feel. It depends on what you're used to in the past. But if you can do a siren, that will give you a sense of what you're looking for above the secondo passagio. So in your case, this E flat and above. Now, that siren sound is not particularly well balanced. So it's not going to, in the finished product, feel and sound exactly like that. But it is a starting point for you to establish an expectation and establish a practice of getting to it and getting out of it and getting back to it. In the video that I referenced a moment ago, it starts with exercises that begin above the secondo passagio. You. And you can really clearly hear me making that change. You. But the important thing to notice here is that that first pitch is not airy. You. That type of phonation will not connect to what's below it. It won't ever get to a point where it sounds consistent. It can sound beautiful and cool, and people have had wonderful careers singing with that breathy, cool kind of affectation to their voice. But it's not going to connect where you get a seamless transition across the secondo passagio. That seamless transition begins with that hollow sound. You, 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 you. And in time you learn to ascend. You, 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 you. And then you narrow the interval, and then you move on to scales, and so on and so forth. I go through all of those steps in the 3 video series. This is now a shameless plug. If those 3 videos, if the gradations between each of the exercises aren't small enough, I did a course on my website that does exactly what I'm talking about here, and it's called High Note Boot Camp. And I would suggest you try the 3 video series first and work through those exercises. If you find you're still struggling, then maybe get in touch with me via my website, and we can see if High Note Boot Camp is right for you. But that's what I would begin with. Number 3, I've been having trouble trying to figure out how to maintain good breath support from my core without blowing too much air, and was wondering if you had anything to say on the topic. Well, to my knowledge, I haven't heard you sing, so I don't know exactly what you're doing. But if you're losing that much air, it would seem apparent that you are imbalanced to the side of the flow of air. This is quite likely, and now I'm kind of reaching for things here because I haven't heard you and you haven't said this, but I suspect that the way that you are adducting the vocal fold is not as efficient, not as complete as it could be. So my suggestion for you would be to start with dynamic air pressure exercises. Conveniently enough, the video series that I am in the middle, they will have been released by the time this video comes out. So the past couple of weeks, I just released a bunch of videos that begin with dynamic air pressure exercises. Jeff, what is a dynamic air pressure exercise? It is where the air column weights the vocal fold and then unweights it. So you get exercises like this. We, 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 we. We, 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 we. When you do that exercise, the air column is weighting the vocal fold, and then it adducts, it shuts, closes. I don't like to say it shuts because it doesn't really close. It's like a wave. It kind of vibrates, and so it's adducting. It's moving towards the body's center line. So it adducts, and then you stop the flow of air, and it has a chance to change shape. That's the key. That opportunity for the vocal fold to change shape creates an opportunity for you to, in the context of the exercise, listen to your voice, monitor your engagement, try to keep the phonation, the exercises, as neutral sounding as possible. In other words, I'm not trying to do anything with my voice here. I'm not being we. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm not we. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm trying to emulate as much as possible a neutral, natural kind of phonation. It's almost like I'm talking to you, but in pitch. We. In so doing, with some practice, you will find that balance of subglottic air pressure, which you're referring to as airflow, and vocal fold adduction. That will give you a better adduction of the vocal fold. That will mean that you are going to blow out less air. And then you can move on to melismatic exercises where you're singing longer phrases, the notes are all connected. You try to maintain that same sound of your voice, that well adducted, well engaged sound. Really cool question. Thank you for asking that. What do you think about Paul McCartney's 1965-1970 voice? The way he went through registers in a silky way, never missed a note, added rasp and grit with ease, switched from Elvis to Pavarotti while having fun. Yeah, I don't. I might wear it on my sleeve. I'm not so sure. I love Paul McCartney. I love the sound of his voice. I love his songwriting. I love their recordings. I just I think he's great, and oftentimes I will go off listening to all different kinds of music and artists, almost anything and everything imaginable. But I tend to always come back to the Beatles, and I will come back to good old Sir Paul. I just love his voice. I love the way he sounds. I would take a little bit of issue with the never sung a wrong note, because there are plenty of recordings out there where he's fishing for things, and there's plenty of off-color notes in there. But I only say that to say that he was looking for things too, and he had to work things out just like all the rest of us. And that in no way should detract from just how awesome he is. It certainly doesn't detract from how awesome I think he is. In fact, I think he's even more awesome for knowing that not only did he have challenges that he had to face, but he worked through them. That, to me, is really quite cool. So, yeah, I love Paul McCartney. Thanks for bringing it up. All right, number 5. I think we're nearly done. How do I release my tension in my jaw? I want to relax it a little while trying to sing those high songs and add more power to my breath. What should I do? I would suggest you do your vocalizations with your jaw starting. Think about like one finger between the molars. So if you take your pointer fingers and you push in your cheeks so that you can feel the cheek flesh between your molars, start with that kind of space. Or maybe even a little bit less. Maybe it's a little bit narrower than that. And open on the way up and close on the way down. In that way, what we're doing is we're separating the motion of the jaw from the phonation, and it gives us a bit more freedom. That is frequently the first step in addressing jaw tension. You may find that you manifest jaw tension in a different way with that exercise. You might start it. That is a very typical thing to do. This is where using a mirror can be very helpful. So do your phonations when you're practicing this, when you're doing this practice, do it in front of a mirror. Watch the motion of the jaw. We want it to be smooth. It, might take a little practice. But that's where I would begin. If you're starting an exercise that starts higher up and then descends, you do the opposite. So if I were going to go, then I'm going to start wider, narrow, widen, and narrow. That can be a very, very good practice to get started with releasing some of that jaw tension. Cool question. Thank you so much for asking. Number 6. I am coming to you with a question. You might have answered it in a Q&A of yours or somewhere else, but I was wondering, how could I get rid of hoarseness in my voice after I've done vocal practices after a while? I tend to get a minimum of 1 hour up to 1.45 hours of vocal practices a day. Ever since I began practicing, I've quickly started to get them. Now, over 1.5 years later, I have created a routine where I try to spend my practices all across the day so the voice gets a break before I practice again. Otherwise, 20 to 25 minutes later, I feel the hoarse feeling in my throat. Most of the time at the end of the day, where I do my final vocals, the feeling has become quite strong, and I no longer can sing. Is there anything you could recommend me? I have a true passion for music, and soon enough I expect myself to start releasing my own music, but come the time to record, I no longer am able to sing like I would expect to. Thank you in advance. You truly have changed my vocal strength and endurance with these practices, and I hope that soon enough I will able to thank you in other ways than just commenting my appreciation. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your comments and thank you for your appreciation. That is amazing. I am sorry to say, however, that if you're getting hoarse, it's quite likely how you are doing the practices. And you are almost certainly using more vocal fold engagement or vocal strain than is necessary to create the pitches. It could also possibly be that your apagio breath practice, and if you're not familiar with that phrase, that would be a place to begin your apagio breath practice, your apagio breath management. That is not in play enough to create appropriate subglottic air pressure, so appropriate air pressure below the epiglottis, below where the vocal folds are, so that they can release adequately to produce the pitches that you're singing. You could be singing too high for the level of technique that you have been able to acquire thus far. My recommendation is to stop, because if it's starting to hurt you, that is not productive. That's not how this is supposed to go. So stop. I would suggest you get someone to teach you, to get some lessons. I don't say that quite so directly in general, but for what you are describing, and especially in the context of your intent, you wish to release music, then the fastest way to understand what is happening, to get practices that will resolve it, will be to work with someone that can help you, listen to your voice, make up exercises for you, talk to you about what's working for your voice, what's not. They will help you to get an apagio practice, or I would hope that they would help you get an apagio practice going. And that way you will resolve this as quickly as you can. And because you've mentioned practicing for the past year and a half, it's quite likely that you're going to have to circumvent some existing habits now that you've built over the past year and a half. That too can be complicated. However, a teacher can really help with that. You don't have to necessarily go to one that's very, very expensive. Yes, I totally understand that lessons are expensive, but you have said that you are very passionate about music, and you have said that you wish to release music. You might consider this as studio time costs. There are all sorts of costs to releasing one's music, not the least of which is studio time, but I would also argue the preparation for going into the studio. So if you're not already owning your own recording equipment, this issue can cost you more in studio time because it's going to take longer to get your vocal takes. So instead of spending it on the studio later, spend a little bit of that now on some lessons with someone that can help you to sort all this out. I would highly recommend you check out the NATS. I believe it's nats.org, nats.org. They have a teacher finder in there. You kind of have to search around a little bit for it, but it's there, and that will help you find a teacher in your area that you have to sort of tick a few boxes in order to be listed with the NATS organization. So they're likely to be highly reputable and will be able to help you really, really get everything sorted out so that you're not getting hoarse any longer. You've got a good apagio breath management practice. You can get on to making the music and getting into the studio and recording yourself and releasing your material. So I hope that helps. I'm sorry if that's not the exact news that you might have liked, but that is what my suggestion for you would be. Thank you all for the questions. I always enjoy this segment on the channel. And again, if you've got any additional questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below and I'll address them just as soon as I can. A big thank you one more time to my Patreon supporters. I really appreciate the support. Thank you so very much. And of course, thank you to all the folks who are subscribing to the channel. Truly helps the channel. Truly appreciate it. Thank you. Have a lovely day. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing, and we'll see you again. Bye.